And a welcome to the UFC to Hong Kong's Ramona Pascual making her short notice UFC debut at featherweight this weekend. Yes, I said featherweight, taking on Josiane Nunes. Her nickname's Josi, and she knocks fools dead. She has foolish power, and you absolutely love to see it in her fights. I mean, you don't often see women at 5'2" having success at 135, taking on taller fighters, putting them in plum clinches, throwing knees up the middle, and then finishing them. That doesn't happen, but it does in Josiane Nunes fights, and in her last time out, making her UFC debut as a slight underdog against Bia Malecki. I mean, Bia Malecki, Swedish national Muay Thai champion, and in that fight, did not look like it, because for Nunes, she was able to just close the range and throw power shots up against the cage and finish that fight in Nunes fashion.
Now, this is why I have completely changed my opinion on Josiane Nunes, and I think it's very important to say. I thought she was going to get destroyed by Bia Malecki. I really did. Because to me, size at a certain point matters. And not just to me, like it does in MMA. Rory McDonald and Gegard Mousasi is one of the best examples of this. Two guys who match up very closely on the feet, in grappling, and in wrestling, but one guy is much larger than the other guy. That fight wasn't even close. Gegard Mousasi destroyed him. In my mind, I thought, okay, I know you have to make weight classes, but Bia Malecki was quite obviously a much bigger fighter than Josiane Nunes. I think that's something we can all agree on. Nunes knocked her out like she was John Lineker fighting Michael McDonald. That's a deep cut right there. But Nunes really does have that fight-ending power. And it's weird because she's not overly technical for someone with her background. She's the type of fighter who goes in there looking for the knockout. I sort of match her up with like a Vanderlei Silva in that respect.
Joanderson Brito.
Joanderson Brito, another good example where it's like, hey, I get knockouts because I show up to get knockouts. And the problem with that is when you show up to win by knockout, you quite often leave losing by decision, because if you don't land those big power shots, you're going to get tired. It's like Gavin Tucker against Rick Glenn compared to Gavin Tucker against Sam Sicilia. The only difference in that fight was he didn't throw power punches against Sam Sicilia. He just let the volume speak for itself. Whereas against Rick Glenn, he threw every shot trying to knock him out and got exhausted early on. With Nunes, that's something you're always going to have to worry about because she does throw those fight-ending type of shots. But in these weight divisions, and against unranked fighters in these weight divisions, head movement isn't all that prevalent. I think that's something we can all agree on. So Nunes, if she is matched up strategically on her way to the top, it'll be interesting to see if she does fight at featherweight or bantamweight. I expect her to be at bantamweight, but again, fighting someone like Malecki, who is very big, and having this fight at featherweight, be interesting to see if they do decide to keep the division open. Maybe she could fit in, but she's a tough night in the office for anybody.
Well, this is the craziest part about this fight, because originally Josiane Nunes was supposed to take on Wu Yanan, who had a knee injury. They replaced her with one of the craziest stories I've ever seen. Now, listen, reports differ, secondhand stories, Instagram posts, whatever you may have seen, but she was supposed to take on Jennifer Gonzalez Arenado, and I looked and went, oh, a debuting fighter at 35 at women's bantamweight, that's tough. And then USADA showed up to her gym in Chile, and things went off the rails. So please do read about that, because it was insane. That was news over the past weekend. So, in steps Hong Kong's Ramona Pascual, who, listen, if you look at her last two fights, those were her first two fights ever in North America. One with Icon, one over with Invicta. She was originally supposed to, in her last fight with Invicta, take on Courtney King. She fell out of that fight. King did. So, listen, Shamir Peshewa ends up in that fight. And I went, Shamir Peshewa? Doesn't she follow me on Twitter? I've seen her out there before. Yeah, that's her. So I tuned in for the fight. I tweeted. It was on the screen with Invicta. I was sitting here full of glee, and I enjoyed that card. It was a lot of fun. There was a headlining title fight, and nonetheless, Ramona Pascual goes into that fight and looks amazing. She made light work out of Peshewa. She's able to just whip different things to the body, throw her knees in there, and ultimately it was a couple knees and a couple of punches to follow it up that ended up getting her a big first-round finish. She did some more interviews after the fact, South China Morning Post with friends of the show, Nico Atkin, and when I did look at that, it was like, okay, she wants to fight Courtney King again, probably wants to get herself into a title shot with Invicta. And keep in mind, we have it on the screen, her last fight was 150 pounds. That was a catch weight because it was on short notice, but she's talked about it in different interviews about the move that she's made from Hong Kong to the States. She trains at Syndicate. She's had a couple of camps at Syndicate now, her last 2 fights, and that was a big move to try and really start knocking down the door of the UFC. And the craziest thing for Ramona Pascual, she was a national team member of the Hong Kong rugby squad. Like, you absolutely love to see that. She's the second fighter that I've really seen of late representing Hong Kong. Obviously, Sasha Platnikov did when he was around. But Ramona Pascual, born and bred Hong Kong. You love to see it. Different representation from all over the world. But the craziest part about her is she spent a lot of time at the UFC Shanghai PI, really honing her craft over multiple years. She was a part of that academy, and you even saw it last year when corners were falling out and some of the people from Shanghai weren't able to represent, like Dean Amazinger, where we had Ramona Pascual cornering Na Liang when she made her UFC debut in a crazy fight against Ariane Carnellosi. But Matt, when I go through this, Ramona Pascual right now making her UFC debut at 33, but she just started MMA at 27. And when you look at the way that she fights, I think she's continued to get better. She obviously had a big layoff between 2017, 2019, major knee surgery there, then a bit of a layoff from 2019 to 2021. But I do like what I've seen out of her in her last 2 fights. She loves to throw knees to the body, and it's not just 1 fight or 2 fights. That's her best move. A nice 1-2 to try and break things up. She's a tricky southpaw too. I just wonder if she kind of gets caught looking in the mirror, and that's an opportunity for Josiane Nunes, who just, I'm not joking, just runs across and blitzes people.
Do you know how scary it would be to be looking across the cage and just seeing Josiane Nunes sprinting across? Because here's the thing. She's legitimately a foot shorter than me, but she'd be throwing windmills like Deontay Wilder. I'd be terrified. I don't know about you, but that'd be a scary sight to see. This is my issue with Pascual in this fight. She has to play Nunes' game to win. And I think that's a really tough ask for really anybody, because if she is going to be on the feet, content to throw 1-2 shots, trying to use her knee as her power strike up the middle, I really do think she's going to be on the receiving end of a lot of overhand and looping shots from Nunes, because it's very similar to kind of how Derek Lewis has a lot of his success. When people throw lazy kicks when they're on one leg, that's when he can capitalize by rushing forward. Nunes is very similar with how she times her own attacks. I do think that if Pascual doesn't set up her kicks perfectly, if she does find herself being lazy, throwing out a naked leg kick here or there, throwing a naked knee to the body, that's when Nunes can really rush her and land those big combinations. I do expect her to do that in this fight.
And for Pascual, if you look at it, again, I mentioned the fact that her last fight was at 150 on short notice. She's fought at 145. She's fought at 135. When she had her consultations, and I want to give credit where it's due, I listened to an interview from last year with Asian MMA, Andrew Whitelaw, the interviewer. You might know him from doing different spots with Fight Circus, and I love watching Fight Circus. And ultimately, 135 will be her natural weight class. We'll see her there, but kind of the move for her, there weren't many opponents that you could find in China due to the restrictions, so that's why she ended up at Syndicate MMA. But you look at the level of training partner for somebody like Pascual. I mean, not just Joanne Wood, John Wood in the corner, so on and so forth, but we've seen so many fighters at Syndicate. I know we already mentioned Emily Whitmire this week, or in this week's videos, but she's there featured prominently. But yeah, when it comes to this fight, I look at the odds. I don't honestly know where they're at. Tapology, for some reason, has Josiane Nunes as a minus 325 favorite, plus 250 on the comeback for Pascual. I went on best fight odds. There was only one site that had odds. The average, Nunes right now, minus 175. Pascual at a plus 150. So let's bring up the Tapology votes, see what the fans are thinking on this one. Ooh. And 393 total votes, 87% Nunes, 76% by knockout.
Did they think it was Amanda?
For the 13% that have Pascual, 56% by submission, by decision, and so on and so forth. But Matt, when I do look at this fight, Pascual, I like her overall game. I don't necessarily love the volume. I think if you can weather the storm of the first round, you beat Josiane Nunes, because she fights herself into exhaustion. It's not just the one fight in the UFC. Go back and watch the fight tape. I want to give you an example. There's one fight where she takes on Juliana Araújo. That was back 2 years and 4 months ago.
No disrespect, but she's just some lady.
Araújo goes at her. Josiane Nunes, to defend, kind of puts her in a guillotine. They stay there for 4.5 minutes of the first round.
Meathead stuff.
It's awful. It's the worst. And her only loss on her pro record is to Tyler Santos by decision, who she now trains with when she goes to Astra Fight Team, which is a part of her regiment. So, again, I look at this fight. I have Josiane Nunes, but if Ramona Pascual ended up winning in the second round, third round decision, I could see it happen. The trouble for me, though, is Pascual tends to hold her hands a little low, and she's not the most volume-heavy fighter. Great top pressure when she does get there. I mean, you go back to her second-to-last win that she had over Guadalupe Guzman, who was making her pro debut over with Icon at Icon 7. She gets her into a mounted crucifix and absolutely goes bonkers, cuts her to the forehead. It's great. But again, overall, I do have Nunes. I think those bursts, normally I don't think they work against many people. I think this is a fight that they will.
That's why I don't think Pascual has the highest ceiling, to be honest. Like, I think her striking's okay, but I do think she lacks the power to really get a lot of people's respect on the feet at the UFC level. That'll be interesting to see, because let's say she goes out there, weather storm against Nunes. You could be right. She could look really good later on in the fight. I just think Nunes, you kind of know what you're going to get with her. If it goes bad, it's going to go horrible. It's going to be like a Adolfo Vieira loss, where you're like, wow, really? Like, this is how we're going to lose? But with Nunes, the peaks are very high, but so are the valleys, let's just say that. And I do think she'll be able to get another knockout win if she is able to get Pascual up against the cage. There's few women's fighters who have the devastating punches at this weight class that Nunes does. I really do think she is at like a tier of her own when it comes to power punching. I do think we'll see that this weekend.
Both of us going with Brazil's Josiane Nunes to get the win. Let us know down below if you have Hong Kong represent Ramona Pascual in her UFC debut, or if you have Josi in this one as well. Big time slate of cards coming up and plenty of other prospects to look out for. So keep locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say,
let's get into it.